For decades, the world adored Roy Rogers, the king of the cowboys, whose charm, voice, and larger-than-life heroism defined an entire era of westerns. But behind the camera, one man knew a different side of Roy better than anyone else. Gabby Hayes, the beloved bearded sidekick, whose gruff humor and twinkling eyes made him an icon in his own right. Together they rode into America's living rooms, capturing hearts across generations. Yet long after the cameras stopped rolling, Gabby Hayes carried secrets about his friendship with Roy that he never shared publicly, until now. In the golden age of westerns, theirs was one of Hollywood's most endearing duos. Roy Rogers, clean-cut and heroic, was the all-American cowboy. Gabby Hayes, the scruffy, lovable old-timer, was his loyal companion through thick and thin. But behind the laughter, long rides, and cinematic adventures, their partnership wasn't always as smooth as it seemed. Hidden tensions, creative clashes, and Hollywood politics quietly strained their bond. And Hayes, known for his humility and discretion, chose silence for years out of respect for his friend. Now, long after both men have ridden off into the sunset, lost letters, interviews, and behind-the-scenes accounts have surfaced, revealing how Gabby Hayes truly felt about Roy Rogers, as a man, a star, and a friend. What he finally confessed in his later years left fans stunned, because while the public saw a picture-perfect friendship, Gabby's private reflections told a far more complex story, one of admiration, frustration, and forgiveness. He revealed how fame changed Roy, how Hollywood executives manipulated their on-screen chemistry, and how, in the end, both men came to understand what truly mattered: loyalty, integrity, and respect beyond the camera's glare. This is the untold truth of Gabby Hayes and Roy Rogers, and the emotional confession that changed how fans remember the greatest cowboy duo of all time. In the early 1930s, Hollywood was booming with cowboy tales and frontier heroes. Westerns had become America's escape, a place where good always triumphed, and the dusty trails led to justice, romance, and redemption. Among the rising stars of this cinematic frontier was a young, handsome singer named Roy Rogers and a rugged, wisecracking veteran actor known as Gabby Hayes. Their paths were destined to cross, and when they did, it changed Western entertainment forever. Gabby Hayes wasn't your typical Hollywood figure. Born George Francis Hayes in 1885, he had already lived a full life before stepping in front of a camera. He'd worked in vaudeville, tried his hand at business, and even retired once before returning to acting out of necessity during the Great Depression. By the time he entered Western films, he was older than most of his co-stars, grizzled, bearded, and full of colorful charm. But his natural humor and everyman authenticity made him stand out instantly. Roy Rogers, on the other hand, was Hollywood's golden boy. With his polished looks, smooth voice, and genuine warmth, he embodied the American ideal of the clean-cut hero. When Republic Pictures began pairing him with Gabby Hayes in the late 1930s, they had no idea they were about to create one of the most beloved partnerships in film history. Their chemistry was effortless. Gabby's rough-edged wit perfectly complemented Roy's straight-laced sincerity. On screen, Gabby was the grumpy yet loyal sidekick who always had Roy's back, often providing comic relief or sage advice between gunfights and horseback chases. Off-screen, the dynamic wasn't so different, though a layer of complexity began to form beneath the surface. Gabby admired Roy's talent and discipline. He saw in the younger star a work ethic that mirrored his own, as well as a kind heart that wasn't common in Hollywood. But he also recognized the pressures Roy was under, the studio demands, the relentless filming schedules, and the expectations of being the perfect cowboy. As Gabby would later admit, Roy had the weight of the West on his shoulders. I just had to keep him laughing. Together they made magic. Between 1939 and 1946, Gabby Hayes appeared in over 40 Roy Rogers films, including classics like Southward Ho, in Old Caliente, and King of the Cowboys. Audiences adored their banter, the easy friendship that felt so real it blurred the line between acting and reality. Children across America saw them as role models, the wise old mentor and the noble cowboy hero. Behind the scenes, however, Hollywood was not the carefree world fans imagined. Studios were strict, controlling everything from wardrobe to personal appearances. Gabby, with his years of experience, often found himself defending Roy when executives pushed him too hard or tried to mold him into something he wasn't. They wanted Roy to be perfect, Gabby later recalled. But the thing that made him special was that he was real. Their friendship deepened as the years went on. They spent long hours on set, often in the blazing sun or freezing desert nights, swapping stories and joking between takes. Gabby, nearly 25 years older, became a kind of mentor to Roy, not just in acting, but in life. He was the old-timer who'd seen it all, Roy once said. He taught me to stay grounded, no matter how bright the lights got. But success brings challenges, and the Western world was rapidly changing. As television began to rise, film studios started shifting focus, and new stars were waiting in the wings. Gabby, though beloved, began to feel sidelined. He was often typecast as the same funny old sidekick, while Roy's fame continued to soar. Still, their bond remained strong, at least for a time. They shared respect, laughter, and mutual understanding, even as Hollywood's machine pushed them in different directions. What no one knew then was that beneath the surface of that laughter, there were growing differences, creative tensions and quiet frustrations that would one day cause Gabby to step away from the man he once called his favorite cowboy. But in these early years, before fame grew heavy and egos clashed, Gabby Hayes and Roy Rogers were more than co-stars. They were brothers of the screen, riding side by side into movie history. As Roy Rogers' star rose higher than anyone in Hollywood could have imagined, Gabby Hayes found himself standing in the long shadow of the man he once helped shape. What began as a partnership built on mutual respect and easy camaraderie slowly turned into something more complicated, a mix of admiration, disappointment, and quiet resentment that neither man ever spoke about publicly. By the early 1940s, Roy Rogers was more than just a cowboy actor. He was an institution. His name sold lunchboxes, comic books, toys, and radio shows. The King of the Cowboys wasn't just a performer anymore, he was a brand. And with that came the relentless pressure of perfection. Every smile had to shine, every word had to inspire, every appearance had to be family-friendly and flawless. Gabby Hayes, in contrast, had always prided himself on authenticity. He didn't care much for fame or image. He still wore his old boots long after they'd worn through, still spoke with that gravelly drawl even off set, and still refused to let Hollywood tell him how to act. To him, acting was about truth, not glamour. And as Roy's fame grew, Gabby began to see that truth slipping away. The tension started small. During one of their later films together, Gabby reportedly clashed with Republic Pictures executives over script changes that made Roy's character more polished and his own role smaller. The studio wanted Roy to shine brighter, and that meant cutting back on Gabby's screen time. Gabby protested, saying the audience loved their banter, that the friendship between their characters was what made the movies work. But the executives didn't care. Roy Rogers was the star, and everything revolved around him. Roy himself never asked for this imbalance, but he didn't fight it either. With each new contract, his name got bigger on the posters, while Gabby's got smaller. The old sidekick noticed, and it hurt. Hollywood has a way of reminding you who they think matters, Gabby once said in an interview years later. And it wasn't the old guy with the beard. Still, Gabby never turned bitter, not openly. On set, he remained the same jolly, joke-cracking cowboy fans adored. He respected Roy too much to let ego get in the way. But behind the scenes, he began to distance himself. Friends recalled how Gabby would sit quietly in his trailer between scenes, carving wood or reading the paper, while Roy met with publicists and producers. The bond they once shared was still there. But something had changed. Part of the strain came from Hollywood politics. The studio machine was ruthless, pitting actors against each other to keep control. Publicists often spread rumors to maintain Roy's wholesome image, sometimes at Gabby's expense. One story claimed Gabby was too grumpy to work with, another that he was difficult on set. Both were false, but they spread quickly, creating a wedge that neither man addressed directly. Gabby, who valued loyalty above all, took it personally. He'd always been Roy's defender, the man who had his back during tough shoots and bad deals. To see his reputation twisted to serve a narrative hurt deeply. "I never wanted to be famous," he said once. "I just wanted to be fairly remembered." Despite the growing divide, their on-screen chemistry never faltered. They continued to make audiences laugh, to ride side by side through dusty canyons and danger, their partnership looking as genuine as ever. Fans had no idea that the friendship that warmed the screen was quietly cooling behind it. By 1946, Gabby Hayes decided it was time to step away. He left the Roy Rogers series on good terms publicly, citing age and the desire to slow down. But those who knew him said there was more to it, a heartbreak hidden behind that trademark grin. "It wasn't Roy's fault," he later admitted, "but the business got between us." Still, Gabby never spoke ill of Roy. Even when reporters tried to bait him into criticism, he would smile and change the subject. Deep down, he still loved the man he had ridden beside for nearly a decade. "Roy was the real deal," he said softly once. "Maybe Hollywood forgot that, but I never did." As Gabby faded from the screen, Roy's career continued to soar: television, radio, merchandise, and the golden partnership with Dale Evans that defined a new chapter in his life. Yet, in rare quiet moments, Roy would reflect on the old days and the man who'd once been his closest ally. "There'll never be another Gabby Hayes," he said years later. "He made me better than I was." Neither man knew it then, but their story wasn't over. Time and truth still had one more revelation left to bring to light. In his later years, Gabby Hayes retreated from the bright lights of Hollywood and the dusty trails of Western sets. The old cowboy who had once been the heart and humor of B-movies now lived quietly, far from the cameras. Fans still remembered his booming laugh, his scruffy beard, and his endless loyalty to the king of the cowboys. But as the years passed, one question followed him wherever he went. What really happened between you and Roy Rogers? For decades, Gabby brushed the question aside with a grin. "Ain't nothing to tell," he'd say, stroking his beard. "Roy's a good man." But those who knew him sensed there was more behind that gentle dodge, a mix of respect, regret, and truth left unspoken. It wasn't until near the end of his life that Gabby finally opened up, revealing a story that would change how people saw both men. By the early 1950s, Gabby had shifted from film to television. He hosted The Gabby Hayes Show, a children's Western program that showcased old cowboy films and taught simple lessons about honesty, friendship, and courage. Even off-screen, he lived by those same principles. Yet when pressed about Roy, there was always a pause, a flicker of something deeper. In a rare 1956 radio interview, Gabby finally offered a glimpse into his heart. "Roy and me," he began slowly, "we weren't just partners on screen. We were partners in spirit. I love that kid like my own. But Hollywood's a hard place. It don't care much for friendship once money gets in the middle." He didn't speak with bitterness, just weariness. He admitted that while the studio had played a big part in driving them apart, he too carried blame. "Maybe I walked away too soon. Maybe I should have told him how I felt instead of letting the suits get between us." Gabby's words revealed something fans had never imagined, that behind the rugged exterior was a man deeply loyal but quietly wounded. He confessed that he had always been proud of Roy, even after they stopped working together. He'd watch Roy's television show with Dale Evans and smile. "He kept the West alive," Gabby said softly. "And I'm glad he did. But I do miss riding beside him." Friends who visited Gabby in his final years recalled that he often spoke of Roy with warmth. Despite the pain of separation, there was never resentment. He admired Roy's commitment to family, faith, and his fans. "He stayed true to who he was," Gabby said once. "That's rarer than gold in Hollywood." In one of his last known interviews, he shared a touching story that had never been told publicly. During their final film together in 1946, Gabby had been struggling with arthritis and exhaustion. One day, between scenes, Roy noticed him wincing as he climbed onto his horse. Without a word, Roy helped him up, adjusted the saddle himself, and told the director to delay shooting until Gabby was ready. "He treated me like a brother," Gabby recalled with tears in his eyes. "That's the Roy I remember." It was a moment that defined everything. Not the fame, not the films, but the friendship that endured despite the distance. "We had our differences," Gabby admitted, But there wasn't a bad bone in that boy. He just got caught up in a world that moves too fast for good men. After that confession, fans and journalists alike began to see their story differently. What had once been whispered as a falling out was now understood as something far more human. Two men bound by respect, pulled apart by fame, and reconciled by time. When Gabby Hayes passed away in 1969, Roy Rogers attended his memorial service quietly, without cameras or press. Those who were there said Roy stood near the back, hat in hand, eyes filled with tears. "He was my friend," Roy said simply. Always was. Gabby's silence had finally been broken, not in scandal or anger, but in truth. A truth that revealed the depth of his loyalty and the quiet pain of losing a brother in arms to the relentless march of Hollywood. In the end, Gabby didn't expose Roy Rogers. He honored him, reminding the world that even legends are just men, and that the truest friendships don't end when the trail does. When Gabby Hayes passed away in 1969, it marked the end of an era, not just for Western films, but for the kind of genuine, soul-to-the-earth friendship that Hollywood rarely sees. For millions who had grown up watching him alongside Roy Rogers, his death felt like losing a member of the family. But for Roy himself, it was something even deeper, the quiet loss of the man who had helped shape his journey. From a young cowboy actor to an American legend, Roy Rogers received the news of Gabby's passing while preparing for a charity event. Those who were there recalled that he set his hat down, took a long breath, and said softly, "The trail just got a little lonelier." True to his nature, Roy didn't make a grand public statement. Instead, he paid his respects in private, attending the small service with Dale Evans at his side. There were no reporters, no photographers, just friends, family, and silence. After the funeral, Roy spoke briefly with Gabby's widow, Olive. "He was one of the good ones," he told her. "He taught me more than he ever knew." Olive smiled through her tears and replied, "He always said the same about you." In the years that followed, Roy often mentioned Gabby in interviews, always with warmth and gratitude. He called him the heart of our pictures and credited him with grounding the early days of his fame. "Gabby kept me honest," Roy said once. "He didn't care about the money or the fame. He just wanted the stories to feel real. He reminded me what mattered." Behind those words was a quiet acknowledgement that Roy carried some guilt. He knew how the studio system had strained their friendship, how fame, schedules, and marketing had pushed them apart. In his autobiography, he hinted at that regret, writing, "If I could ride one more trail with Gabby, I'd tell him thank you for keeping my boots on the ground when my head got too close to the clouds." As the Western genre faded from mainstream Hollywood in the 1970s, their partnership took on an almost mythical status. Film historians began revisiting their old pictures, pointing out how the chemistry between Roy and Gabby had redefined what it meant to be a duo in Western cinema. They weren't just hero and sidekick, they were equals. Two sides of the same story, one representing idealism, the other representing wisdom and humanity. Younger generations who discovered their films through reruns and festivals saw something rare, an authenticity that modern movies often lacked. In every laugh Gabby shared, in every serious glance Roy gave him, there was a sense of real friendship that couldn't be scripted. "They trusted each other," film critic Leonard Maltin once wrote, and that trust translated directly to the audience. Roy continued acting and making public appearances well into his later years, but those close to him said that no co-star ever filled the space Gabby left behind. Whenever someone brought up the early days, Roy's expression softened. "He was family," he'd say simply. In the mid-1980s, during a Western Hall of Fame ceremony, Roy accepted a posthumous honor for Gabby Hayes. Standing before the crowd, his voice trembled slightly as he spoke. Gabby didn't play a cowboy. He was one, honest, kind, and tougher than a $2 steak. "If there's a roundup in heaven, I hope he saved me a horse." The audience rose in a standing ovation, not just for Gabby, but for the unbreakable bond they had shared. Today, their legacy endures far beyond the silver screen. Fans still gather at Western film conventions to share stories, trade memorabilia, and watch their classic adventures together. Kids who once sat cross-legged in front of black and white TVs are now grandparents introducing those same films to a new generation. And in every laugh, every dusty trail, and every heartfelt moment, the spirit of Gabby and Roy lives on, timeless, genuine, and unshakably loyal. In the end, Gabby Hayes didn't just break his silence. He reminded the world of something Hollywood often forgets: that behind every legend is a friend who helped build the story. Roy Rogers carried that truth with him until his final days. "Fame fades," he once said, "but friendship, that's the one thing worth keeping." And somewhere, in the vast frontier of memory, the cowboy and his old sidekick still ride together, side by side forever.